What's up guys, D2 from D2AOV.com here, bringing you a Veres guide. Yes, I know she's a little bit old news, Darcy's the new kid on the block, but she came out right about the time when I came back from casting the Valor series, and then I got really sick, and you can kind of hear in my voice that I'm still a little bit sick, but I really didn't want to skip didn't want to skip Veres because she is cool and awesome, and we're gonna go over her now. So let's get started with her classification. Veres is a warrior assassin, but she really only has the stats of a warrior. If you compare her stats to the other warriors or other assassins, her HP and armor are higher and her attack is lower. So you can kind of just throw away that assassin tag and kind of treat her like the bruiser fighter that she is. And the way her kit works, that's how she's going to be fighting as well. Even if you build all the damage on her, she's not going to really be able to delete anyone anyway, because her first two abilities don't really scale with damage. She doesn't really have a gap closer other than her ultimate, which is used to finish people off, not really initiate fights. I'll talk about that later. You can kind of do that in a certain state of the game, but it's not a situation where you're going to be really chunking people down with your ult if you lead off with it. And then there's her passive, which obviously does a ton of damage, but it takes a while to set up. You're not going to be able to just jump on someone like you would with a Zuka or an Irie. So that leads me to her strengths and weaknesses. Starting with her strengths, she has plenty of damage in her base kit, so she doesn't really need to build too much damage. I've come up with a build that builds 2 attack items and 3 defensive items. Is pretty good, and it provides plenty of damage for you. The reason why is because if you look at how her abilities scale, sure, her passive scales at 150% AD, but her first and second ability, Bloody Fangs and Serpent Embrace, they only scale like 40% or 50%, something like that, not too much. And it's not something you can really spam all that much either. Or if you are spamming it, it's specifically to get off Buddy Kiss. And finally, Venom, it really doesn't help much from building attack at all. It'll go up like 1% if you look at the parentheses there. So yeah, the building damage isn't really as useful as building lots of defense on her so that you can just sustain through fights and kind of finish people off. Yeah. And like some things like Venom don't really rely on having attack damage, so that's good for her. The next thing is that, kind of related to that point, she has good sustain. She's a really good brawler because of the fact that her Bloody Kiss heals her so much, especially when she gets low on health. And the fact that the longer you go, the more you can kind of just spam out your abilities, especially once you get later and later into the game and you have lots of cooldown reduction, you can kind of just spam Venom, which is kind of a weird thing to think about once you play her at first, but once you get more used to her, you'll realize you can really spam Venom, and not only use it as a finishing ability, but as an engage ability as well. And that brings you to my last point, which is that she's a great finisher. Again, with that Venom ability, we're going to go over Venom later in more detail, but it is so ridiculous. You can bring down Thane from over 30% health. You can bring down Thane before he even has his passive pod, which is absolutely nuts. It does ridiculous damage, and it's probably the greatest finishing move in the game right now because people will not suspect how much damage you can do because it does percent of lost HP as true damage. It's basically like a super execute. So yeah, those are her strengths. If you go to her weaknesses, first off, her ability is a little bit hard to land. Like for instance, if you look at Serpent's Embrace, it's a pretty thin line. I'm gonna turn off cooldown right now, and you have to really hit it right on. Like, see, I'm just to the right of him, and it's not landing. Things like her Bloody Fangs, for instance, like this indicator is completely off. It looks like I'm about to hit him, but I'm totally not. So I can be like right on top of him and hit him with neither. If I go like this. And then her ult's her ult's pretty easy to land, comparatively speaking, but still, you can it's pretty thin. Like if you do something like that, that's not going to hit him, for instance. So her abilities are hard to land, and that's not even getting into her passive, which is pretty hard. It's weird. It's a weird thing because you get faster and you're not hit by CC when you're going through it. So at first, it's so easy to just kind of go forward and miss like this. So yeah, overall, her abilities are hard to land, and that can be difficult because if you miss one ability, you can be kind of stuck. and not get anything off. You really need to land your abilities, particularly Venom and Bloody Kiss, if you want to be effective with Veres. And lastly, she has limited movement abilities. Obviously, she has Venom, but even though the range of the damage is pretty long, if she's trying to run away, it's not great, right? And for some reason in particular, when you're leaving the fountain, it doesn't go very far. Like, I'll be running and it'll go like not very much damage at all. Especially when you're running. If you're running forward, it really doesn't feel like she goes very far at all. You can obviously use your Bloody Kiss as a way to get away using your passive, but that requires you obviously to attack people. So she doesn't really have the greatest reliability as far as movement abilities go, and that can be difficult as far as getting back to a lane, running away from someone, or chasing someone down, other than using Venom, obviously. Okay, let's get started with her abilities, and if you want to take a look at this page, just go to d2aov.com. I changed the ability description a little bit because honestly, the description in the game is a bit confusing. So let's start with Bloody Kiss, her bread and butter. So Veres gains a stack of Serpent's Blood that lasts 10 seconds when her normal attacks land on an enemy. Bloody Kiss is triggered at 4 stacks, granting Veres 35% increased movement speed and immunity control effects for roughly 0.8 seconds. So that's where I added that. If you go back into the game, essentially, if you land both, I tried to time the time that she's faster and the time between when she like triggers Bloody Kiss and when it actually goes off, and it's roughly 0.8 seconds. I was getting between like 0.75 and 9, so it's around 0.8 seconds if you want to like have a rough estimate. And then after that, she does 300 and then plus 30 per level. So if you're level 15, I believe that's 740. Let me just double check that. Yes, 740, and then plus 100%, 50% of your AD. And she gains 12% lifesteal if an enemy hero was hit. You only lifesteal off of one hero. We'll talk about that later. But it goes up to 120%, and it's basically increments of 12%, right? Like if you are at 90% plus health, then you only get 12%. If you are 81 to 90% health, and you get 24%. So it just, it perfectly increments up in increments of 12%, all the way down to if you're less than 10% somehow, then you get 120% healing. And then they reduce the cooldowns of your other abilities, which is nice. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the ability mechanics that I was able to kind of figure out. The most important thing to start off with is that Veres attacks are longer than most melee heroes. They're around 400 units. They're basically the same length as like a Malok. And so normally if you're like a melee hero, it's like around here, but she can hit people from around here, right? And it's perfectly 400 units, which is the length of her other abilities. So she's basically always going to want to stick around this distance from people so that she can just kind of sit around and use auto attacks. So that's really important. It makes it a lot easier to land your Bloody Kiss knowing that your auto attacks are longer. It's really strange actually that they didn't note this anywhere in her ability descriptions. For instance, Malok, it's written right there that he has longer attack range. So kind of strange that they didn't mention that. In any case, the band from Bloody Kiss, it hits enemies around 300 and 500 units away. It seems like pretty big, but it's a bit harder to land, like I mentioned earlier. Her normal attack can miss if the hero she's targeting is running away. That's kind of like the downside of her having ridiculous range, is that sometimes she'll miss if they start running away from her. So, okay, like I mentioned, so hit... Right. So here's what I was mentioning earlier. Veres, she can only life steal off of one enemy hero, even if she damages multiple heroes. It would be pretty ridiculous if she healed like all the way up to full off of one Bloody Kiss. However, hitting multiple heroes does increase the cooldown reduction. So if she hits 2 heroes, then Venom's reduced by 4 seconds. So that's pretty cool. Normal attacks only provide 1 stack of Serpent's Blood per attack, even if she hits multiple enemies. So there's a little bit of confusion in the ability description. Made it seem like, if she hit multiple heroes, then she would get multiple stacks. That is not the case. And it's also the case that she gains a maximum of 2 stacks per ability. So no matter how many heroes you hit, she's only going to get maximum 2 stacks. And that's kind of confusing when you look at the other abilities, especially the descriptions. It makes it seem like you can get 4 stacks off of one Serpent Embrace, but that's not the case. You can only get 2 stacks at a time. if you have 3 stacks and you gain 2 stacks, then Bloody Kiss is triggered and she'll have 1 stack left over. That's pretty easy to show. Like if you have this and you use that and you do another one, she'll do the Bloody Kiss and she'll have a stack left over, like so. All pretty standard stuff. And she does not gain stacks on towers. You could probably guess that was the case, but if she incidentally, damages minions or something nearby, then she will start getting stacks. On the one hand, that can be kind of annoying, especially when you want to take towers down as quickly as possible. But on the other hand, you can kind of clear the way. If you're like by yourself, you can clear the way while killing the tower at the same time using Bloody Kiss, because the animation is not that long. She can't lifesteal off her shields, so this is important because usually people don't really think about it too much, right? If you, for instance, are a marksman and you're using lifesteal, which is most of the time what people are using, you just kind of attack, or if you're like a Kilgarth or something, right? You attack. You don't really worry about whether they have shields or not, and you eventually get to the actual juicy part of them, and then you finally get your lifesteal, right? But because it's just one instance of the Bloody Kiss, and everything rides on that sometimes, whether you're going to die or live, it can be disappointing, to say the least, if you don't get the lifesteal. But you do get all the other benefits. You do get the cooldown reduction, so you don't have to worry about that. And then the tips, obviously, is very straightforward. It's her lifeblood. You do not want to miss it. Not only does it give you lifesteal and do a lot of damage, but it also gives you cooldown reduction doing other things. So you basically really want to continuously just cycle through Bloody Kiss, right? Once you get one Bloody Kiss off, you want to get your abilities off, so you get another Bloody Kiss off, and then those reduces the cooldown of your other abilities. Then you can do it over and over and over again, and that's the key, right? So if you miss one Bloody Kiss, then all of a sudden you don't have your cooldown reduction, and you're a little bit screwed. And also you didn't deal damage and you didn't heal. So do not miss Bloody Kiss. That is the moral of the story. Last couple tips is one thing is that if you are just sitting there, it's very tempting because of the fact that you're kind of stuck in this band, or in this like kind of range of 400 units the entire time. It's very tempting to kind of just like let go of the joystick and just attack from here, especially if they're stunned. You're like, okay, I'm gonna let it go, and then my Bloody Kiss is gonna go off and I'm gonna hit him. But because, hold on, I'll show you. If I turn on Thane and like I auto attack him, watch, I'll run to him. Even though I'm not pressing the joystick, I'll start running toward him. See, I'm moving toward him even though I'm pressing the joystick. And the reason that's really bad is because if you press like attack, for instance, or if you're like attacking them and you're not pressing the joystick, you will automatically start moving toward him. Like, watch, I'm not even gonna press the joystick. When he comes back, oh my god, please Thane. Okay, watch. See, I'm gonna start moving toward him. In that case, it just happened to hit him. But a lot of times, there's been so many times where I got lazy and let go of the joystick, and I ran right past them. So you have to be careful about keeping your finger on the joystick so that you don't just run right past them and miss the Bloody Kiss. And another tip here is that your initial instinct should be to run away, not to chase after them. Obviously, this takes a lot of getting used to as to whether you think they're going to run away or they're going to run into you. Most of the time, if you're in a DS lane, people are going to be pretty headstrong and try to fight you. So they're going to try to run into you and kind of invade your space. If they're like an Arthur or like an Astrid or something, they're going to try to run right into you. And so your initial instinct should be to run away, not chase after them. If you try to chase after them, they're just going to run into your circle and not get affected by it. So I would say try to relearn how you fight, because when you're fighting against other people, when you're fighting with other DS laners, for instance, your initial instinct is to chase after them, especially if you think you have the advantage, especially if you're going to use like your signature ability, right? And Veres' signature ability is her Bloody Kiss. But you need to be aware that in order to land it, a lot of times you need to start running away. And even if they run away as well, you could probably catch up to them unless they use like some sort of dash. In that case, you're probably not going to get them anyway. Last thing is just pretty simple. Just charge up your Bloody Kiss on things like the Seagull, stuff like that, before fighting. It makes it easy to attack them, but that's pretty straightforward. All right, let's move on to her first ability, which is Bloody Fangs. And let's read the description from the game this time, because it's not that confusing. So she just kind of throws 2 snakes forward, and if you hit someone, it reduces the movement speed for 50%. If you hit them with both, then it stuns them. and you can get up to 2 stacks of Serpent's Blood. This is pretty straightforward. You just kind of throw it out. It can miss pretty easily, so my advice to you would be to set up most of your fangs, your bloody fangs, with Serpent Embrace. So if you hit your Serpent Embrace first, then it's really easy to just spam out the bloody fangs and hit. Otherwise, I wouldn't like chase after people with this. It's better. This is kind of like a convenience ability, right? Like if they're kind of right there, then okay, use it. But I wouldn't like chase after someone and be like, "Come here, I'm gonna hit you with my bloody fangs," right? Because it's only 500 meters long. It's actually shorter than the indicator. And so you're not really going to catch someone with it. It's just kind of like your brawling tool. It's ostensibly her damaging attack because it does scale at 60% AD, but it really pales in comparison to most other DS Laners abilities. This is just kind of there. This ability is just kind of there. You don't have to like think too much about it. It's pretty short cooldown. It's 6 seconds. It doesn't reduce in cooldown if you level it up, so don't level up. And yeah, it's decent at clearing wave. That's one thing also, is that you can kind of use this to clear wave, and you can save your Serpent's Embrace for if a hero comes along. So that in that case, the 6 second cooldown is nice. At the beginning of the game, it's exactly half the cooldown of Serpent's Embrace. So you can use one on the wave, and then it'll come back, and then you can use your Serpent's Embrace on something else. But yeah. Anyway, the point is, like I mentioned, do not be too. Do not expect too much out of this ability. If they're chasing you, you can be like, okay, stop. Or if you already caught someone, or they're kind of fighting you, then you can be like, okay, boom. But other than that, don't really expect too much out of this ability. Let's move on to the next ability, which is Serpent's Embrace. And this ability description is kind of confusing because it says in the second sentence there that enemies are stunned. They're not necessarily stunned. And I'll show you a situation in which they aren't. If they're exactly 400 units from you, you can see they're not stunned. So be careful. They're not always going to be stunned. The instances when they're stunned are when you're able to either push them back or pull them in. Now, this isn't immediately obvious at all, but the first instance of damage pushes them away. The second instance of damage pulls them in. And that's a big deal, right? Because if you hit them with the first instance and you're close to them and you push them away, you're almost automatically going to get 2 stacks. Like almost always. It's really hard to get to not hit the second one because you stun them and you've knocked them away, and they're gonna be stuck there. Unless something really weird happens, like I don't know, like a net hits you with like a hurricane wall or something like really weird like that. But because if the first instance pushes away and the second instance pulls them back in, like watch Thane here. The first instance will damage him, but he won't get pulled in until I hit him with the second instance of damage. Do you see that? So if I push him away, the first instance pushes him away, and then the second instance just kind of deals damage, right? In fact, he's stunned from being pushed away. The second thing doesn't actually do anything at all. Whereas if I try to pull him in, the first instance of damage doesn't do anything; it just damages him, and the second instance pulls him in. Now, this is really important because you're not always going to be able to pull someone in. If you hit someone on the edge of Serpent Embrace, you're not necessarily going to pull them back in because they can use like a dash, or if we're really on the edge, they can perhaps run away and get hit by the first instance of damage and not get pulled in by the second. So it's actually not that hard for the Serpent Embrace to only get 1 stack if they're on the edge of it. So be careful about that. You're not always going to pull them in. As far as tips for this thing, it's pretty straightforward. You really want to hit it. You really want to save this for heroes. Obviously, if you know that no one's around, you can use it on a minion wave and kind of clear really quickly. But again, neither Serpent Embrace nor Bloody Fangs are going to give you any stacks in the minion wave. So a lot of times you want to just save your abilities and use auto attacks on them in case someone is coming around to attack you. But yeah, this is also pretty straightforward. You just kind of need to land it. Obviously, it's like super thin, so you got to be careful with it. My advice to you would be to go into training like this and just kind of mess around with it. It's kind of similar to Joker's rocket in a way, but yeah, just kind of do this and kind of play around with it. And oops. And this way you can kind of get used to using it. One of the better ways to use it is to kind of push people away. I mean, obviously that's part of like the ability itself, but I would say that especially if you're playing in the Adidas lane, a lot of them like to get up and close and personal to you, and so it's better to just kind of brawl with your other abilities and save it for when they get right next to you, because that's the best way to push them away and get your bloody kiss off. All right, time for my favorite ability of Veres's, and that is Venom. Now, why is it my favorite ability, you ask? Well, it's because you can have your cake and eat it too. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's take a look at the ability description. So, she rushes to the target and deals 600 plus some percentage of lost HP true damage. Now, let's just right off the bat use Venom and see what happens. So, it does 600, and then it does some sort of percentage of lost HP, right? I'm going to use it on Thane when he has 100% health, which means he has 0% lost HP. And it did 778 damage. That's more than 600. So what's going on here? In fact, the damage is calculated after the base damage is dealt. So it will subtract 600 damage from your opponent, and then it will calculate from there a percent of the lost HP. Now, even better is the fact that it will actually add the buff. If you read on and on, the name of your hero's hit, Veres enters in rage, increasing your attack speed by blah blah blah, attack damage by blah blah blah, and armor pierce by blah blah blah. Now, that buff is actually retroactively added to the damage it deals. So if you go and do the math and do the calculations, and I have this amount of damage is based on that ability doing 29% of lost HP. It is not based upon 26%, right? So it will retroactively add the damage from Enrage. And this is why I mentioned earlier that you don't really need to build much damage onto Veres, other than like Muramasa and Fenrir's Tooth, which I particularly like. You can actually just go one or the other, but I like them a lot, and I'll explain to you why in a moment. But the point is, you don't want to go really heavy on attack damage, because if you look at how it scales, it goes up 4% every single level, and then it goes up another percent every single time as well, because of the increased attack damage that you get that's built into the ability. So every time you get this massive power spike for level 4, then level 8, and level 12, the 3 times that you can level up the Venom Ultimate. Now, if you get attack damage on her, it's really going to increase this part, the 1% of AD, by like 1%. So it's really not all that worth it, other than getting something like Fenrir's Tooth. And the reason why is because it really multiplies when you start getting low on health for your opponent. Now, if you actually do the math, and I have, and I might actually show a different video on how I did the math, but if you are at a level 1 Venom, in other words, level 4, then if you're dealing with squishies, and I've defined squishies around 3,400 HP, obviously it's true damage, the armor doesn't matter, oh, I kind of wrote HP here and didn't write HP for these ones. Anyway, you get the point. So squishies, they're around 3,400 HP at level 4, 4,200 at level 8, and 6,000. These are just rough estimates by me. Tanks are about 5,800, 7,800, and 12,000. Again, just rough estimates by me. But at level 4, you can kill squishies from 22% and tanks from 18%. At level 8, you can kill squishies from 28%. And you can kill tanks from 23%. And at level 12, when you hit your level 3 Venom, and you have roughly 27% of lost HP dealt, that is the percentage number. It's going to be the percentage number here. It's going to be roughly 27% after you include the enrage buff. You can kill squishies at 31% of their remaining HP. That is absolutely ridiculous. So they can have so much of their health left, and you will just absolutely delete them. And then it kind of even more impressive if you think about it. You can do 20. You can deal a lethal blow to tanks from 26% damage. So they can have quite a bit of health left, and you can absolutely delete them. And just for fun, I added in Fenrir's, which you get 29% because with Fenrir's, obviously, you get 200 AD out of it, so it jumps to 29%. And then from there, obviously, you get 30% extra damage. So you can kill squishies from 40%, and you can kill tanks from roughly 34%, which, as I mentioned earlier, is more than the 30% at which Thane's passive is triggered. So that is absolutely nuts. Okay, last thing before we move on is to talk about how the abilities work for Venom mostly, but I guess also for Bloody Fangs here. This was a Reddit post from about 15 days ago explaining that on the test server, they kind of fixed the indicators. Obviously, that's not the case right now, at least on Tencent servers, but just for your reference, this is what the ability looks like if you're trying to aim Venom. It's like you go forward and you land, and then there's like a cone in front of it. So it's actually easier to land if they're kind of farther away in that regard. Okay, let's move on to talk about what to do with Veres in the lane. To start off with, as far as leveling up your abilities goes, obviously you level up Venom every single time. From level 3 on, you want to level up Serpent's Embrace every single time. That's her second ability. From level 1, it depends on if you're jungling or in the DS lane. Obviously, you're mostly going to be in the DS lane with Veres, but she can be a reasonable jungler, kind of like a Wonder Woman type, like a bruisery, control-y type of jungler. And she actually has really fast clear speed. In that situation, you do want to go for the Bloody Fangs, which allows you, obviously, to clear faster because of the shorter cooldown, and obviously does more damage. And if you she actually has a cooldown, a clear speed about 50 seconds, which if you add the 30 seconds for the monsters to spawn in the first place, you're done in like 120. And that's counting every single monster, like all 6 of these. So that's really actually pretty fast, especially because you can do little tricks like hitting monsters from over the wall, because she has greater attack range, and you can hit multiple monsters with your Bloody Kiss, things like that. But if you're going to be in the DS lane, then you're going to want to level up the Serpent Embrace first. And it sounds kind of weird because normally you'd want to go for the thing with the lower cooldown, but it's just so unwieldy and doesn't really help you at all when you're fighting people, that you're better off just leveling up your 2, because what you want to do is just kind of clear the wave with your auto attacks anyway, kind of scare them off. Use the threat of your Bloody Kiss to scare them away, and if they get close, then you can just be like, go away with your Serpent's Embrace, right? So you really want to level that up first, otherwise they could kind of mess with you, and if you're kind of just flailing in the wind with the Bloody Fangs, and you could be in trouble. As far as Venom is concerned, Venom's kind of interesting because it really depends on who you're fighting as far as how you're going to use the Venom. The thing is, it does give you a buff, which is very, very nice. Obviously, you can get attack speed, you get pierce, and you get the extra damage. So it's tempting to just kind of jump in and use it. The problem is, obviously, is that once you use it, you don't really have an escape, and if they're really good at dueling, then you're just going to die. Also, if there's a gank coming, obviously you don't want to use your only escape tool to just go in. And then there's, again, the last obvious thing, which is that it does so much damage when they have a lot of lost HP. It's such a great finishing move that you feel like it's a waste to use it at the start. But then again, the earlier you use it, the quicker you're going to have it back up again. And the answer I've kind of come to is that if you're going against extremely good duelers, like auto attackers like Omen, Lubu, and Kilgroth, then you do not want to use it as an initiation, because you're just going to jump in, you're going to get your couple attacks off, you get your Bloody Kiss, that's all good and fine, and then they're going to chase you down and kill you, and you're going to be very sad. If you're facing someone like a Dioma, for instance, who, you know, he has his flurry of abilities and he kind of just runs away. Like, maybe wait for him to use it on the wave, and then you jump at him with your Venom and, you know, damage him a lot. And then that gives you the advantage, maybe rotating to the other lanes, because he's already, like, kind of chunked in half, for instance. You know, Veres, even though it's very tempting to kind of sit there and fight, a lot of times you kind of wait, especially in the early game, for either your Bloody Kiss to be up, or near up, obviously, with 3 stacks, or you want to wait for the Serpent Embrace to be up. Because if you don't have those, then it's not very reliable for you to be able to duel. So, because your cooldowns are somewhat long in the early game, you really just kind of want to wait for your cooldowns, get them off, get your Bloody Kiss off, and then kind of leave and run away. And in that regard, you do not really want to use Venom as an engage tool. You'd rather wait for it to use as a finishing tool. But then again, like I mentioned, you can use it to engage, get some damage off on like a Deomorph or something, and then run away and be like, peace, I'll see you later, and then come back and fight. But definitely don't do that against someone who can really duel you and punish you for jumping in. As far as team fights are concerned, I would say that in the early game, you kind of just want to be that bruiser, that secondary frontline hero, to get in and deal damage, you know, within the middle of the fight, right? You're kind of like trying to get the back line, but if you can't, then just get what you can get in the front lines. But when it gets later in the game, I think you can kind of turn to a pseudo Zephys, basically, and start using your Venom to get to the backline, because your cooldowns will be so low, and if you're able to land a Bloody Kiss, it'll be even lower on your cooldowns, that you can use Venom to just jump into, you know, like a Telenos or something, and immediately just kill them, to be honest, because you'll have the extra damage. If you have both Muramasa, or if you do have Muramasa in your build, then you'll have 80% Pierce, which is absolutely nuts, and you can basically rip through anyone, and if you get one Bloody Kiss off, you'll have your Venom up pretty quickly. One thing I like to do, because, you know, sometimes I'm not very confident in being able to hit a Serpent's Embrace, is what you can do, especially with Frostcape. You can use Venom to jump in, and then just use, or yeah, you can miss like that as well. But instead of having to rely on landing the Bloody Fangs, what you can do is just go, you know, Venom, auto attack, and then Serpent's Embrace, and then auto attack again, and that will get you your 4 stacks that you need. And they're not likely to be able to get away from it. And that in that situation, like in case you accidentally miss a Serpent's Embrace, then you can still get the full amount, or all 4 stacks off, right? Because say for instance I go into thing like this, right? I get the auto attack off, I miss the Serpent's Embrace, I can still auto attack again, and I can, you know, make the get the Bloody Kiss off, right? Whereas if I don't auto attack and I kind of just rely on hitting the Serpent's Embrace, which can be a pretty long animation, then I'm screwed if it doesn't hit. So if you want to hedge your bets, then you can auto attack and use the fact that you have Frostcape to your advantage and get the Bloody Kiss off nearly guaranteed. So how to counter Veres? Basically do the opposite of, or take the opposite philosophy of what I've said so far. So if you miss Bloody Kiss, you're screwed. If you miss the Serpent Embrace, you're screwed. If you miss Venom, then you're screwed. So basically make the Veres miss all 3 of those abilities. If they miss one Bloody Kiss, one way to make them miss Bloody Kiss is to just jump right into their faces, and it's hard for them to back up. And that really messes with their cooldown reduction and stuff like that. Obviously, you can kind of bob and weave and use your movement abilities to make them miss Serpent's Embrace. If you make them miss Serpent's Embrace, then it's really hard for them to get their passive up, and they don't have that ability for quite a while. You jump in their face to make it so that they can't push you away anymore, and then also makes it so that they can't really hit you with Bloody Kiss even if they get their attacks off. So everything revolves around dodging Bloody Kiss, dodging Serpent's Embrace. Obviously Venom's something you need to watch out for if you're getting low. If you're like a tank, for instance, and you're used to surviving at low levels of health, and you got to be particularly aware of if Veres is in the area, and make sure that you either run away or find a way to dodge her Venoms, that you don't get messed up by that. As far as Arcana are concerned, I would go for Onslaught, Gorilla, and Skewer. It's the standard attack Arcana with Gorilla in place of Assassinate, because Gorilla obviously gives you that attack speed, which will help a lot in the early game. Even though she likes to build tanky, and even though she has percentage pierce in her kit, which works well with Muramasa and kind of makes Skewer not that great later on, it's still nice to have that early game advantage and to be able to duel opponents early. Otherwise, you might fall behind. You can go for something like Indomitable instead of Onslaught. I would say Gorilla is almost 100% necessary. As far as Skewer is concerned, it's such a good Arcana, even though it's going to be wasted later in the game, that I would recommend it anyway. But if you want to go for something else, you can go for something like a Valiant for the cooldown reduction. You can go for Focused for the cooldown reduction if you want to go for different items than the one I'm about to show you. But yeah, as far as just maximizing stats and not really worrying about cooldown in your initial Arcana, I would just go for Skewer there. So yeah, Onslaught, Gorilla, Skewer. Other options being like Indomitable and Focus and Valiance. Alright, let's get to Veres' items. And to start off with, I have a bit of a different philosophy than other players and even other pros when it comes to how I want or how I kind of envision Veres being built. Obviously, you need to go into a game and be able to kind of feel out the build, but just philosophically speaking, I think that going for as much cooldown reduction as possible is the best way to go with her. And I think if you're not getting the 40% cooldown reduction, then you're really missing out a lot as far as like what she's capable of doing. And the reason why is because if you look at Venom, she gets so much ridiculous, she gets so many buffs out of it. She gets attack speed by 60%, attacks damage 350, armor pierce by 35%. If you were to put together an item that encompassed all of that, it would cost like 4,000 gold or what have you. And so instead of trying to make up that difference by buying other items, I'd rather just have as much cooldown reduction as possible, get my Venom back up as much as possible, so I can use it as both an engage and also as a finisher in the fight, since it's so ridiculous. So I'd rather just have as many Venoms as possible rather than getting those stats from your items in the first place. So let's talk about what I consider the two most necessary items, two most core items for Veres. And the first one is Muramasa. And the reason why is because, first of all, you get 10% cooldown speed, and as I mentioned before, I love cooldown speed for her. But the second part is that she gets 45% armor pierce. And why that's important is because, like we mentioned earlier, using Venom increases armor pierce by 35%. And that's a percentage-based pierce. And if you didn't know, you add percentage-based pierce. If you have a raw armor pierce, then you actually take the raw pierce first, and then you take the percentage. So, for instance, if you bought something like a rank breaker for Veres, then you would have to subtract the 250, and then you take the percentage of whatever was left over, and it ends up being like 25% or 20% or something like that. So it's really just negative synergy, counterproductive. Same thing goes for Spear Longinus. So all that aside, the fact that you can do 80% pierce is just ridiculous, and it makes it so much better for you to engage with Venom, because once you engage with Venom, now you're doing 80% pierce, and that's absolutely massive when you're trying to kill someone. The second core item I would say is going to be Frostcape. It doesn't have the best stats, but it's just so perfect because your auto attacks are so long. Veres, it feels like Frostcape was made for her, right? Because you can use an ability, and her auto attacks are so long that she's almost always going to get off a slow. And to get off a slow from 400 units away is pretty nuts. Obviously, Frostcape was an ability or an item that's was and still is used for things like marksman, because you can slow them from such a long range. But to be able to use it, to be able to have the full, benefits of the item stats on a hero, because warriors love defensive stats more than I would say that marksmen do. To have like the full benefit of the stats and also get the benefit out of the passive from such a long range is absolutely huge. and that's why it makes it so valuable. And then obviously, like I mentioned, you get the cooldown reduction. Now, from here is where my thoughts on her items kind of differ from other players. I really value the Aegis because it slows them down when they attack you. It has a ton of armor. It's probably the best defensive item in the entire game because the Spirit Bond passive is way better than the Spirit Bond passive with Shield of Lost. If you haven't tested it out, that is the case. And also 20% cooldown speed. And like I mentioned, I want to get to 20% cooldown speed. Like no questions asked. Other people end up going for Odin's Will instead, and I think Odin's Will is actually a really good item for her. The problem is it doesn't really find any room in my builds because when I'm building her, I want to go the Aegis, I want to go Frostcape, I want to go Murmosa, and then I need some magic defense, so I go Gaia Standard. Then after that, because of the ridiculous damage that I mentioned before, I had to go Fenrir's Tooth, and if I'm not going Fenrir's Tooth, then I want to go something like Blade of Eternity. So that's why even though Odin's Will is really nice on her, because you're almost certainly going to get the full adrenaline passive off. You're going to have that 10% movement speed and 10% damage on all your additional damage. It's just not as good as having the full cooldown reduction. Other items to consider, like I mentioned, guys, is probably the go-to. If you're not going to go to 40% cooldown with like something like Aegis, then you can skip Gaius and go to Medallion. Because it just gives you so much bang for your buck, or so much bang into one item, I should say, and then you can just heal off of your passive instead. Obviously, there's things like you could just kind of wing it, like go Mail of Pain, go Hercules Manus, what have you. A couple items I want to talk about though that are not very efficient. The first one is Mantle of Raw, and Mantle of Raw, it's normally chosen on almost all Darkslayer laners, but the reason why it doesn't really work, very well for Veres is that the range of the passive is about 150 to 200 units, and that is within the range, or it's not as long as the range as her auto attacks. So if she's kind of sitting here auto attacking, then the Mantle of Raw passive isn't actually going off on the opponent. And for almost all other DS laners, if they're attacking, then the Mantle of Raw passive is going off. So it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to use it. Obviously, you can buy it if you want, because it is a very nice combination of armor and attack. And if you're, if you have no confidence at all in hitting any of your abilities, you can kind of just stand near them. But I think that's just kind of resigning your fate to not having a good game. Even I wouldn't go that far. I'm not the greatest Veres, but even I wouldn't go as far as going for a strategy where you're standing right next to them, even though your entire philosophy is built around not standing next to them. One other item I would say that is not great is Fafnir's Talon, and the reason why is the same thing as I mentioned earlier, right? Like the reason why you get Fafnir's Talon is for the attack speed. Like the attack damage is like okay, the lifesteal is okay, but you already have a lifesteal in your passive. The Dragon's Breath passive is kind of dumb. I suppose it synergizes somewhat well because you can, get the initial damage off on their, it's based on their remaining HP, or current HP, and then you can do the extra damage with your Venom at the end and kind of finish them off. But it really doesn't do a whole lot, especially if you're not a marksman. And you don't, again, you buy it for the attack speed, but you don't need the attack speed because you're going to be relying on your auto attacks or your abilities to get off the passive, or you're going to be relying on the buff from Venom. And again, if you just have cooldown reduction, you can have Venom up pretty often. So I'd rather just use Venom, get the cooldown, or get the attack speed from Venom, get the cooldown reduction, so I get Venom up as much as possible. And then I don't have to worry about auto attacking in order to get my passive off. It's just a really bad situation to be in if you're trying to use auto attacks to get to continuously get your stuff off. You can weave in auto attacks, but I would not be relying solely on them. Last item I forgot to mention is for the boots. You want to go Gilded Greaves basically every single time, even if you're facing off against a physical damage dealer in the Darkslayer lane, because you're going to be within the opposing team a lot, and you need to get either your auto attacks or abilities off very reliably, and if you're stun locked, you're going to die. A lot of times Veres works on a knife's edge, and if you can get one more Bloody Kiss off, then you're going to not only live, but probably kill them all. So you need to be able to get your Bloody Kiss off, which means you need to be able to use your abilities and or auto attacks. And so you're probably going to be staying alive a lot longer with Gilded Greaves, even if you're going against, like multiple marksmen. It would have to be a very specific situation to pick something like Sonic Boots. And even then, if you were going against that situation where you didn't have to worry about CC very much, then you'd still probably want to go for something like Flashy Boots instead. So yeah, Gilded Greaves is the way to go. So this is the full build of mine at the bottom. And you may notice that I have Astral Spear in the first slot rather than Muramasa. And the reason for that is because you want to build damage first and then defense second if you're in the DS lane, because that allows you to do a lot better than you would normally be able to do if you went defense first. If you have a lot of experience in DS lane, then you will know this, that if you go defense first, you will lose the duel a lot. So you do want to go damage first. However, Muramasa has percent-based armor pierce, which means that it's not going to be doing very well in the early game when your opponents really don't have that much armor. So you want to go for Astral Spear first, get the maximum amount of damage out of that, because it is, it is raw pierce instead. And then later on, about 10 minutes into the game, you're going to go ahead and want to buy Muramasa and switch that over, and that'll complete your build so that you have the full 40%. I think that building specific tier 2 items is particularly important for Veres. For instance, you can go Astral Spear into boots, into like double platinum gauntlets. You can queue up something like Magic Ring, pre-order that. There's 3 Magic Rings in the build if you include Muramasa, the Aegis, and Frostcape, so that's the amount that you want to keep in mind so you don't buy an extra one. You can kind of go all tier 2 items, go like Astral Spear, and then Platinum Gauntlets, Nice Plate, Belt of Clarity, and you get really all that you need. You get lots of defense, you get regeneration, you get cooldown reduction, and you don't have to go, it costs like a fraction of the tier 3 items. So I think in Veres' case, you really want to be, if you're really good at going to the shop and pre-ordering, then I would do that for sure to make sure you get something. The important ones are Astral Spear, Belt of Clarity, Platinum Gauntlets, and Nice Plates, and Magic Ring. Although that's barely any less cost than the Platinum Gauntlets, but yeah, those are the items you want to go for to make sure that you're covered and to make sure that you're not screwed out of like cooldown reduction. For instance, if you need to go for like magic defense first, if you're like against her rocks, you need to go for like Belt of Clarity. So that's something to keep in mind when you're building her. Alright guys, thanks for watching, thanks for enduring through my cold and enduring through the fact that I can't think properly right now. But I hope you guys go out, I hope you guys win with Veres, and I hope you go to d2aov.com. Hope you subscribe to this channel. By the way, we passed 100 subscribers. That means that the channel is now officially at youtube.com/d2aov. Hooray, hurrah. Click the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys later.